Joining us on the line now is TRE Fosh. She's a psychotherapist who primarily works with addiction. She's 9 years sober and a recovered anorexic. Her book is called Hooked: Why We Are Addicted and How to Break Free. In it, she sheds light on the true meaning of addiction and the subtle ways it can manifest itself without our awareness. She explores why we often seek external factors to change the way we feel internally and provides practical tips and tools to help readers break any self-destructive cycle they may find themselves in using easy steps. Welcome to the show, TRE.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being with us. So one of the things that kind of seems apparent is that there are obviously different levels of addiction. You know, when we think of the word addiction, we might kind of think of someone who's, you know, heavily addicted to drugs or alcohol and has a serious problem. But it's not always that serious. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly. I mean, I like to view it as sort of on a sliding scale. So there are, as you say, different levels of it. Because if you know, I sort of, the word for me, addiction, means when we use something outside of ourselves to change the way we feel. And if we look at sort of today's society, and there's pretty much anything and everything that we can use to change the way we feel, from, you know, social media, food, cigarettes, drink. So this is why I sort of what I wanted to write about was the fact that it sort of the breakdown, the sort of stereotypical addict, which is someone who is heavily addicted and whose life, you know, can't really function without it. Because there are, you know, many different things that we can use to change the way we feel in today's world.
Social media is a really interesting one, isn't it? Because I don't think many people would like to admit or easily say that they're addicted to social media, but most of us are on it multiple times a day.
Absolutely. And, you know, there was a recent study done in younger people, and I think it said something like 32% of young people who were more unhappy after spending 3 hours of social media a day. And, you know, you think about 3 hours of your day, that's quite a long time. And I mean, I'm certainly one to if I find myself having had a long day, I will pick up my phone automatically and go onto Instagram or TikTok, because it completely sort of numbs you out. Now, it's obviously not necessarily as harmful as drugs or alcohol, but it can get extreme, and people, you know, people's lives can become unmanageable as a result. They don't want to socialize. They become even more isolated. So it's absolutely one that people don't really want to admit, because it's so available and so accessible, and people love it, you know. But it can be something to watch out for.
There are also people who I guess are more inclined to go down these kind of roads than others. You know, we hear the phrase addictive personality.
Absolutely. I mean, there are some genetics involved, especially ones with sort of alcohol addiction that they've found more specifically. But that's why I sort of view it on a sliding scale. You know, for me personally, I'm an addict in recovery, and so I can be addicted to anything in quite an extreme way. But other people might find that actually they can do it, but it doesn't make their lives unmanageable. And that's what I mean by the sort of sliding scale. Everyone is different. And it's more about asking ourselves why we engage in these behaviors before it gets perhaps too late, or before it gets more self-destructive.
Yeah. Alcohol's a really fascinating one to talk about. You know, here in Spain, there's very much an outdoor social lifestyle that we're very lucky to have. And, you know, there'll always be people who drink more than you. You know, I've heard many people over the years. So it's not like I wake up in the morning and reach for a bottle of whiskey. And that's their kind of justification for, you know, not feeling like they're an alcoholic or feeling like they have a problem. But a lot of people, as a kind of normal thing for some, you know, do reach for a drink to just kind of take the edge off after a hard day at work.
Well, exactly. And that sort of goes back to why I define addiction the way I do. You know, that is literally to change the way that we feel. Now, it's not a bad thing. You know, it's very natural for us to want to have good feelings and to sort of avoid the bad. But just because, you know, I have young clients who are at university and they say to me, you know, yeah, but I'm not drinking any more than so and so. And there's a big binge drinking culture. Get to the end of the week, then you get to have the sort of reward. But that doesn't mean that the other people's relationship to alcohol is healthy. And, would it be like if they were to stop drinking? Or I certainly noticed when I stopped drinking that I was met with a lot of, oh my God, that's so boring. And usually it was because they were the people that either I had enabled when I had been drinking, or they had also an issue with alcohol themselves. And the idea of someone else not drinking was quite confronting. So, there is the society, there is this sort of it is acceptable in society. But the reason I wanted to write this book was to challenge people to look at their relationship to it. Why do we drink like that? Do we need to drink like that? What might we be able to do instead? Because it doesn't always, end well. Normally you have a weekend and you get really drunk and the rest of the weekend is spent sort of hungover and you're then unable to do what you perhaps wanted to do. And those are the things that kind of make your life unmanageable as a result of the drink. But it's very difficult in our sort of society, which is so sort of accepting of it, to then stop, because everyone does it, as you say, to just take the edge off.
And as you said as well, that people can often judge you, if you say, oh, I'm not drinking tonight, or I'm cutting down, or I've decided to stop drinking, any of those things. People are often, oh, really? Why? People don't just kind of go, oh, okay, fair enough. Good for you. They kind of want to ask questions as if it's like the weirdest thing ever.
Totally. I think actually, it's slowly becoming more acceptable to not drink. Because of all the sort of non-alcoholic substitutes anyway, you feel actually if you go to a bar, you can have a non-alcoholic beer, or a pub, and a bar probably in Spain, and it perhaps be, more acceptable than not drinking. But when I first, stopped drinking nearly 10 years ago, it was sort of, what? Why? Why would you want to do that? And it was very difficult. I had to remove myself from going out at all, any sort of social occasions, because I also didn't know really who I was without the alcohol. We know that it really relaxes us. It makes us feel, excited for the night ahead. It makes us chat more easily. And so people use it very much as a crutch, but perhaps without awareness of how much of a crutch it really is.
Yeah, sometimes people who are stopping drinking alcohol have to literally change their friends, because if your friends are people that you always get together and have a big drink with, and that can be really difficult, then it can really help finding new friends who maybe don't drink like you, and that can be a lot easier to socialize.
Absolutely. And it is because it is everything. Well, actually, no, that's not true. Not everything revolves around alcohol. There are things which I had to find that are do not include alcohol at all. But that's very difficult if you're going away from that, to then you kind of have to rebuild your life. That was certainly the sort of my experience of it. Some people can still go out the same way as they were before when they were drinking. But I'd always say to someone, if you are thinking of stopping drinking, to give yourself, at least a couple of months of not putting yourself in positions or in places and with this sort of dangerous, in inverted commas, people that might tempt you. Because once you kind of build once you have a couple of months under your belt of, oh, okay, I didn't need to drink, it's much easier to then go out. But it's very difficult, especially for the younger generation, I guess. Actually, saying that, maybe not. I was speaking to someone the other day who said, her and her husband love wine, and they always drink it together. And she's like, I really want to stop, but I find it so difficult because it's all part of our ritual together. It's different for everyone. It's not just necessarily younger people who are surrounded by it all the time. I guess we all are surrounded by it all the time.
Yeah, it can be a really big part of people's relationships, not just romantic relationships, but friendships as well.
Totally, bonding over a glass of wine, or, we sort of loosen up, per se, when we've had a drink, and then it feels easier to connect to someone. But, I challenge that, people then say, oh yeah, but I'm missing out on these deeper, meaningful connections. But actually I would challenge that it's not really deeper or meaningful because you're under the influence. It's not really real. And that I learned that the hard way as well, to actually be truly, communicating with someone on a sober level is quite difficult to be honest and open with someone. Whereas when you've got alcohol, it can definitely enhance relationships. It can move them to a sort of what we think is deeper level, but actually, it's not really doing us any favors necessarily.
It's interesting how just the word addiction or the concept of addiction has a lot of negativity around it. Are there things that you can be addicted to that are good for you? I mean, if someone's kind of addicted to exercise, let's say, would that still be addiction, or would that be more like obsessive behavior?
Yeah, I mean, so I would still call it, to be addicted to that, because of the way that it sort of changes the way you feel. And if, the sort of when does it become really an addiction is when it makes your life unmanageable. And this wonderful psychiatrist whose work I love, she specializes in addiction. And she talks about when she had her first child, she started to read romance novels. And after a while, she realized that she couldn't fall asleep without first reading a romance novel. And then it's escalated in that when she went to work, when she went to clinic, she would take her books with her, and every single moment she had in between patients or in her clinic, she had felt this compulsion to pick up this book. It was a sort of complete escapism for her. And it was then making her life unmanageable because she wasn't being able to be fully present. And all these things happened as a result. So she needed to abstain for about 30 days from these novels to really experience all these feelings, and for her brain to kind of come back to what's called homeostasis, which is the sort of level playing field where it's not getting loads of dopamine all the time. So I guess in answer to your question, I mean, yeah, you can be addicted to romance novels. It can really be anything. But of course, when does a hobby become an addiction, right? And that's really when it starts to make your life unmanageable. And I think the problem with addiction is that it's like, the sort of fairground game whack-a-mole. When you whack one mole on a head and it pops down, then another one pops up in a different location. You whack that on the head with a hammer and it goes down. And it's more than about, okay, do I need to engage in these behaviors? What am I avoiding being with? And ultimately for me, it's the sort of distraction from being with ourselves, from sitting still, from being gentle, from asking ourselves questions that we perhaps don't really want to ask ourselves. So there's sort of many different underlying reasons as to why we do it and why we behave in these ways. But I really do believe it can be anything.
That's really interesting about the romance novel. I've never heard anything like that. That just goes to show you, doesn't it? Would you say that if someone is addicted to something, whatever it might be, then they find it difficult to live without it or to go without it. So, people that might say, oh, I don't, I'm not an alcoholic. I don't drink loads of alcohol, but they are drinking alcohol every day. Or people who, the romance novels is a great example. Yeah. There's lots of people who love reading and, whenever they can, they pick up a book, but they're not necessarily reaching for that book 10 times a day. Is it that kind of thing that the idea that you couldn't easily go a week without doing whatever the thing is?
Yeah, I think because it's obviously on a sliding scale and there will be extreme examples like the romance novels. It's asking yourself, what would it be like if I stopped for a week? How would I feel? And then noticing how you do feel when you stop. Because, if people don't have to be drinking every single day to be addicted to alcohol. It can be the binge culture. They have to have it when they go out on social occasions. It doesn't have to be, pouring vodka on the cornflakes, for example. It really can be that it's just, well, oh my God, if I take the alcohol away or I take the behavior away, what am I left with? And if that's uncomfortable and if that feels sort of, oh, this is new and I don't like this, then it's probably something to look at. And there might be sort of, an addiction to that substance or behavior.
The other thing with addictions, smoking is a prime example. You can't really get someone to stop doing something when they don't want to. You know, smoking, so many people over the years will be saying to their husband, their father, whoever, you know, you need to stop smoking. You really need to stop. It's not good for you. You need to stop smoking. And they know it's not good for them. But if they don't want to stop smoking, they're not going to stop smoking. It has to come from inside you, doesn't it?
You're absolutely right. And this is what I do write about in my book, you know, for families and friends of those who know someone and love someone that's perhaps struggling or in an addictive, self-destructive pattern. You can, of course, suggest and guide and explain how it makes you feel. But at the end of the day, someone has to be willing, not 100% willing, but, you know, just a couple of percent willing to change. And if they don't, unfortunately, it just won't happen. You know, there is not much we can do. And that was really my experience. You know, I was actually quite fortunate that I was sort of 22 when I did stop. But that was not, you know, I'd hit a rock bottom. But it could have continued, you know, no matter how many times my parents said they were worried and everyone said they were worried and I'd been in and out of treatment. I didn't want to stop. So it was only really when I'd had enough, I sort of was sick and tired of being sick and tired, that I said, okay, enough. But that sometimes takes people a lot longer than others.
Yeah. So what's the kind of premise of the book? What do you want people to kind of take away from it? Who are you imagining kind of picking up the book and really getting something from it?
Well, I think it definitely it can be helpful for families and friends, if as we were just saying, you know, if they know someone that they think might be engaging in addictive behaviors but isn't unsure. But I think what I really want, the main thing that I really wanted to do was raise awareness around addiction and try to sort of take the stigma out of it, because it's so seen as this sort of, you know, someone living on the side of the street or that kind of thing, that actually I wanted to sort of normalize it and normalize the fact that as humans, we seek the good feelings and we want more of them. And it's very normal that we want more good feelings, but why are we avoiding the bad? And so, you know, it can be really from anyone who thinks they might be engaging in an addictive behavior or with a substance. But actually, even if you don't think that you have that, it can be quite interesting from a sort of psychological perspective of, you know, I talk a lot about feelings and sitting with ourselves and giving practical tips with that. So I think hopefully it will be not just people who think they have a problem with addiction, but it will be quite useful for everyone.
Yeah. It's interesting how the word addict sometimes is kind of bandied about on social media in a funny, light-hearted way, particularly with things like shopping. You know, if you put, if you're buying lots of things online, for example, the idea of being a shopping addict could be seen or portrayed to be something quite funny, you know, quite cool to be like buying stuff online all the time. And that's, I guess, kind of worrying if it's portrayed, or even the idea of being an alcoholic. You always hear people going, oh yeah, you know, I'm a bit of an alcoholic, as a throwaway kind of jokey term. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I absolutely don't want to sort of trivialize it and make it sort of something that's lighthearted, because it's not. And it can be really harmful, especially if you're kind of more on the extreme end of addiction. So it's not necessarily funny. I think, you know, people who say, oh, I've got a shopping addiction. I mean, shopping addiction is actually very much a thing. I wonder if people try to make it kind of lighthearted or sort of, oh yeah, I'm an alcoholic, to, you know, as a sort of defense mechanism, right? To avoid actually going, okay, maybe I have got a problem here, because, you know, I've worked with clients who've had shopping addiction and it's extremely painful because they can't stop and they don't feel good about themselves. But it's not something that they do necessarily every day. This is, again, what I was saying about the sort of alcohol. It doesn't have to be I'm drinking every single day. It doesn't have to be that I'm shopping every single day. It's what you do it. It's why you're doing it when you do it, and actually how you then feel about yourself afterwards. You know, a lot of people then experience shame, feelings of guilt, etc. And then this sort of spiral, the cycle continues, because you feel rubbish about yourself. And then in order to get rid of those rubbish feelings, you do what you know that gets rid of those, which is shop. And then this sort of cycle continues. But it's definitely not something that is to be laughed at, because it can obviously be really harmful for people and for people around them.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's a fascinating subject. Thank you so much for joining us on the show, Tali Fosh. If people want to get a copy of the book, it's called Hooked, and it's available on our website, TRE.radio. Tali, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So great to speak to you. Have a great day.